Developmental psychology is a very, very broad field of study. Essentially, it encompasses the entire lifespan, from the minute you're born to the minute you die, and all the information, all the experiences in between, from crib to crypt, from womb to tomb. What essentially, though, we're going to look at in this segment is cognitive development across the lifespan. The cognitive guru that we're going to look at, pictured here on the left, Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. That's how you pronounce that last name. And a lot of his ideas and concepts we pretty much take for granted today. They're textbook today. But at the heart of it, kids learn differently than adults. I think this is something that we all understand, but many times we forget. All of us at some point in time in the past were children, but we forget what it's like to be a child, and we also forget what it's like to reason like a child. The way that children process things is uniquely different than the way that teenagers process things, and the way that teenagers do this and reason and work through different scenarios and problems is uniquely different than that of an adult. And that's what Jean Piaget sought to punctuate, examine, and experiment with. He outlined 4 stages. The first one of these stages is the sensory motor stage. Now, on the surface, kids at this age who are experiencing the world through their senses, the years for this would be 0 to 2. On the surface, it would seem as if there's not a whole lot going on with a kid at this stage. They don't do a whole lot. They lay in the crib, they play, wanting to be fed, needing to be changed. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot going on. But Jean Piaget did note that there were some forms of logic that were taking place and slowly developing in that childlike mind. One of the biggest mental milestones to be achieved in the first stage is object permanence. You are not born with object permanence. It is something that is slowly developed with time. This is part of the reason why peekaboo is so much fun for kids at this age, because in their childlike mind and way of reasoning, if they're not there yet, that object ceases to exist if they cannot see it, as illustrated in this clip.
Okay. Hey, look, Lucy. Look. It's the clippers. Go get them. Where are they? No idea. They're the clippers. Look at the clippers. Where'd they go? There they are. Good girl. Look at Wally trying to edge his way into the
Again with the eating of the clippers.
For kids at this age, everything goes straight in the mouth, and for her own sake, I hope those were not toenail clippers. But if you notice how the kid was acting with the toenail clippers when they were covered up, because she could not see the toenail clippers, presumably that object no longer existed. Okay, kids knowing that it is still there. Once they reach that mental mile marker, that is the main objective in the first sensory motor stage, to obtain object permanence. Yet another example of object permanence in this clip.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
And if you notice, both of these clips are showing illustrations of this mental milestone. 2 of the children that were videoed had not reached it. The third one, the young girl here, has achieved object permanence, one of the main mental milestones in the first cognitive stage. In the second cognitive stage, the pre-operational stage, the years for this would be 2 to 7. In most individuals, when they think back on what it's like to be a child, the hallmarks of being a child, most of that innocence, most of those precocious moments would be connected with the things that that branch off from this stage. And if you notice the bulleted items that are here, kids at this stage have object permanence. They're also using language in this stage to represent objects and ideas, so certainly they're able to articulate, and mistakes will be made. Kids at this stage are extremely egocentric. It is very, very difficult, if not next to impossible, for kids at this stage to see the world through anybody else's eyes except for their own. The idea, theory of the mind, which is basically empathy, kids at this stage, they lack it almost entirely. If this little boy here had a sister, if you were to ask him if he had a sister, an egocentric answer would be, yes, I have a sister. Okay, but if you were to reverse that and ask him if his sister has a brother, more than likely, based on his age, he would indicate no. Additional principles and terms that go along with this stage of cognitive development: animistic thinking, which loosely translated is a child's imagination; irreversibility, unable to think things all the way through. Opposites many times are very, very difficult for kids at this age to understand. And certainly thinking things all the way through, this is largely where kids, with their imagination, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, they many times buy into this thing wholeheartedly because they can't see or reason their way through it entirely. Some examples of childlike egocentrism as noted by Jean Piaget.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree? Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look?
Now, what makes this an egocentric clip? If you noted at the very beginning of it, the little boy and the woman that's asking him questions, their positioning at the table was reversed. He was over here in her seat just a moment ago. He was able to identify and correctly label everything that was on this side over here, as was he able to do the same on this side of the table. But asking him, can you tell me what I see? And his answer will be very, very egocentric.
Look at this from where I'm sitting right here.
An owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And a little tree. And that. And that.
Okay, so can you tell me what you see from that side?
So again, note when she asked him, can you tell me what I see, he proceeded to identify things that he could see. Yet another example of egocentrism, and then also notice the term up at the top, theory of the mind, being able to see things from somebody else's perspective. This is more of an illustration of a kid who lacks this.
Do you know what this is?
Crayons.
Crayons. If I open the box, what would be inside?
Crayons.
Good. Let's open the box and see what's inside. What's inside?
M&M's.
M&M's. What's really inside the box?
M&M's.
M&M's? Before I opened it, what did you think was inside the box?
Crayons.
That's right. I'm going to close the box now. Now, Jenna is outside. If Jenna comes back in the room, what will she say is inside the box?
Now, before I let this clip play to the very end, she knows what's inside the box. At first she thought it was crayons. Come to find out there's M&Ms, or as she called it, MEMs in the box. Gemma's outside of the studio where this is filmed. Her answer will be very, very egocentric.
M&M's.
Again, because kids at this stage lack the ability to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. Continuing into the third of the 4 stages that Jean Piaget identified. The concrete operational stage would be the third. Children at this stage can demonstrate the concept of conservation. We'll look at some clips connected with that here in a moment. There is basic logic that is being developed in this stage. The years for it would be 7 to 11. So you're looking at elementary school age, maybe early middle school. Very, very early middle school. But what is conservation? As this is one of the main goals and achievements and milestones for the third concrete stage of logic and reasoning. Conservation is knowing that the quantity remains the same despite a change in its appearance. And this is where the clips definitely come in handy, because this definition really doesn't make much sense without something to use to reinforce it. Kids at this stage, if they're not quite there yet, do have a very difficult time conceptualizing this. Okay, but this is the main mental milestone that they accomplish and they achieve in the third stage. These are all examples of conservation failures, where the kid in particular is not quite there yet.
Can you look at these 2 glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? Do you think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that?
And notice with the young girl here, in her age, I would put her maybe at 7 or 8 years old, maybe a little younger than that. But without hesitation, she says that this one right here contains more juice than this one right here. Even though just a second ago, she saw that they roughly had the same amount in it. Okay, this is an example of a lack of conservation. At some point in this third stage is when this child will get and grasp that concept. A few others.
This one has more.
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
They're the same?
5.
Okay.
Okay, so notice, just like with the liquid a second ago, she counted it out, has determined, has reasoned that both rows have the same amount of quarters, but then notice the second part of this experiment. Now that the quarters, the second row has been stretched out,
Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
the results are going to differ.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah.
In addition to these experiments, the low production cost of these experiments, it is also worth noting that with each one of them, a good Piaget replication experiment, one should always have the kids explain their reason and logic. After all, Piaget was all about cognitive development across the lifespan. And even though we can pick out what's wrong and what has been done incorrectly, it makes perfect sense in this little girl's mind. Again, though, this kid has not achieved this milestone in the third stage. Also in the third stage, mental operations. mental manipulation, cognitive mapping, some higher level thinking will take place in the third stage. It's also worth noting it's usually at some point in this third stage that kids quit believing in Santa Claus. In the previous stage, that is the hallmark of having a very vivid imagination, one of the hallmarks of being a kid, and it's usually in this stage that a lot of that imaginary world starts falling apart and disappearing. The last of the stages that Jean Piaget identified was the formal operational stage. And some aspects of this: abstract reasoning, hypothetical thoughts. The years for this would be your mid-teens to adulthood. So at some point, perhaps in high school, generally in the later years, maybe junior or senior year of high school, one becomes a little bit more suited for this type of reasoning. Not that it dominates all of your waking thoughts, but it is a type of reasoning that isn't present in the earlier stages. Okay, some questions that might work or could be looked at and examined from a formal operational stage. What would the world look like with no light? Okay, now a kid in one of the earlier stages could answer this, but to be able to see it all the way through, to be able to expand upon it, the formal operational stage, a student in this stage should be able to do that. A good example also of a formal operational task. Assuming that you have either seen this movie or read the books, these books are written on a very, very low reading level. Okay, a kid in elementary school could read and understand what's going on. Okay, a very basic survey level is a very easy book to read. Okay, but the formal operational abstract task connected with it, for it is a biblical allegory. Everything in it has biblical applications. So if I were to ask a kid maybe in third grade, if they had a somewhat decent reading level, and if they read this, who might be the Jesus figure in this? That might be a very difficult question to ask a third grader, but a high school student should be able to answer a question like that. Or if I were to ask them, who in the Harry Potter series would best match up with the White Witch, her character and who she portrays, and the archetype that she reinforces? A high school student should be able to do that. Certainly not without difficulty, but a high school student should be able to do that. An elementary school student would find it very difficult to do something like this. Criticisms, though, of Piaget in closing. He definitely at times underestimated the abilities of children. Children, they all advance at different paces, at different rates. And anytime you have a grid or a stage describing the steps that one goes through, it seems like it's very rigid and dogmatic, and that would be a criticism. Children learn in stages, but rather a gradual, continuous growth. Again, going back to the stage model, when one blows out the candles on their birthday cake, turning maybe 6 to 7 years old, it doesn't automatically mean that they step into another stage. That some of these changes can be very subtle. And that's another criticism of Mr. Jean Piaget. But at the end of the day, he does get the credit for the way in which he examined the thought process of children.